Welcome back to the Exploring Growth podcast. Today, I have a great conversation with Aaron Weeks from Proofpoint Marketing, and we talk about how to scale relationships. This is a great one. All right, welcome back, everybody. We've got Aaron Weeks here from Proofpoint Marketing Agency and another LinkedIn relationship. You know, we bouncing around on LinkedIn, you meet all kinds of cool people and all around the world, really. He's tuning in from St. Louis, and of course, I'm here from Orlando. And today, you know, we were talking about what are we going to talk about on this podcast that is kind of like a convergence of our worlds, and we landed on this topic that I think is an amazing one for both sales reps, business development reps, and marketers to be talking about today. I think there's a lot of discussion about demand gen that I see from B2B marketers on LinkedIn. That's a almost overhyped topic, and we can actually get into that a little bit later. But this idea of like building a business with relationships, it's funny. It's not a novel concept. You know, people are relational, and I've talked about it a lot on this podcast actually. But if you're going to build a business on relationships, how do you map that to revenue? You know, so and naturally, companies are going to want us to report on metrics that show we are scaling those efforts. So I'll just kick us off here by saying that I had Dan Sanchez or Danchez. I don't know if you follow him on LinkedIn, but I had him on the podcast probably a month or two ago. And it was great. We talked about actually what kind of spurred on the conversation was he and I got in this back and forth on DMs where we were talking about how his philosophy is everything sort of built one-to-one, and so it's not really about scaling as much as it is just about building quality one-to-one connections and approaching it as a human. And so, you know, we were in the same thread on someone's post and kind of going back and forth. And he put in a link to a Loom video that he recorded specifically for me to expound on his thoughts about that one thing. And I was just like, how have I not thought of this? This is amazing. Like, he's actually being a human to me and talking specifically to me in the comments. And so we got, back and forth about that sort of tactic on in our DMs, and that led to the podcast. And then if you go back and listen to the podcast, which I would encourage people to do, I kind of walk people through that whole scenario and how we ended up talking about this one-to-one thing, getting back to just being a person to a person. And Aaron and I were talking, I think this idea of like relationship building, one-to-one, one-to-few, but then like, how do you scale that, right? So I'm going to kind of throw it to you and maybe give us your perspective on scaling relationships, quote unquote.
Love it, Lee. First off, thanks for having me. Also, Danchez, great follow. If you don't follow him on LinkedIn yet, you'll get great insights from him.
That's right.
So when we were talking about this conversation, I was bringing up really the point of view of Proofpoint Marketing that I'm going to kind of really help articulate here on this episode, which is if you scale relationships, you're going to scale revenue.
Yeah.
Now, why this is an exciting topic for me is quick anecdote of my background, how I got into marketing, which is one, I did not have any marketing experience. I had a philosophy degree, was working at Starbucks, didn't know what to do with my life. How I got my first marketing job was going to the networking events, like they used to tell you in the old days. You put on a suit, you go walk in, get some coffee, shake some hands, talk to some people. And that landed me at Caterpillar. And that was a big boy job right out of the gate, getting into that marketing department. And my first whole year, I was just paired with salespeople, writing content for them. Through that experience, I really learned okay, this is all based on relationships. Like you go out in the field, you talk to people, you may not sell them now, but because you built that relationship quickly, that's going to cultivate and grow over time. And then when they're ready to buy, they're going to come back to you.
Yes.
So I'm articulating that story because that's what I think we can do as marketers. That's what I try to get my clients to do as well, to really have a process and system to scale relationships and really scale that digital word of mouth. So when they're ready to buy, they're going to tell their friend to do it. Are they going to come back to you? Again,
Mhm.
if you change the mindset, I
Mhm.
think when you're talking about your Dan Sanchez story, is when you change the mindset, you do different things. So if
That's
you
right.
change your mindset to I'm going to focus on relationships,
Mhm.
and then revenue will follow, your activities are much different rather than I'm going to hyper focus on revenue. And then hopefully those metrics will work their way out. And then those relationships will turn into customers. I'm trying to
Yeah.
flip it on its head. Let's start relationships first.
Yeah, I like that. And so if you switch your mindset to we're going to build relationships, what does that look like? Then your activities, yes, for sure, are going to change. And then therefore the goalpost of what you're shooting for are going to change. You know, your objectives are going to change. Your tactics are going to change. Your activities, your behaviors, everything is going to change. I can imagine, I mean, and having given that advice to a lot of clients, you know, in one way or another, because it's a lot to take. You know, if you're a lead gen, you know, company and you're running ads on Facebook, and then you know you're told to build relationships, that's a complete culture shift, really, when we get down to it. And you know, I think ideas like that are some that CEOs that are listening to this, you know, marketing leaders are listening to this, should take in and try to digest, and then work maybe slowly over maybe a longer time horizon to implement. Because taking really that's what it's going to end up. If you don't have a CEO really, or because this podcast is mostly for mid market companies, if you don't have a CEO, COO, C suite that is relational by nature, you're going to have to change the culture of how the company, you know, the path of what the company is going. So it can be a big ask to do that. But you know, that aside, I think if it were adopted to whatever degree, you know, a lot of things can be adopted experimentally and say, well, we're going to do these efforts in addition to what we're doing and to see what kind of results they bring back. I think what it's going to do is put the conversation on the table about what are we measuring, right, for what result, and then you can start to compare what are our efforts look like over here, and how do we measure those efforts for what result, and what are our efforts look like over here, and how do we measure that for what result. Um, yeah, so tell me more. Tell me more about what you're thinking.
Yeah, what resonates with what you're saying to me is when we tackle these kind of big mindset philosophical changes, there's going to be activities that we do that are either unscalable or unmeasurable.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I bring this up because marketing at one time did different things.
Mm-hmm.
We were advertising on television. We were mainly print in traditional marketing. Some of those ideas worked, right? And we've made this huge pivot to digital and we've changed everything we've done.
That's
So
right.
with this mindset shift, we're trying to get kind of our clients and ourselves to do old school things, right? For
Yeah.
instance, personalized gift giving. That's a relationship activity.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that's not measurable. I can
Yes.
certainly measure how many gifts I send to our prospects. I
Mm-hmm.
think that may be worth looking at. But really, what I'm trying to measure is what's this a meaningful relationship? Is this
Mm-hmm.
person going to come back to me one day once they understand the value and they're educated about what our product or service does? But they're going to come back and say, "Hey, that was such a great conversation with Aaron.
Yeah.
I really want to work with him in particular."
Yeah. Right.
Those are the activities that we're trying to do. Just give a little more granularity of like certain
Mm-hmm.
things we're actually doing. Now, as far as measurement, I think this is what I would offer to most marketers as I am a senior performance marketing manager. Like measurement is part of my function.
For sure.
Um, I think you have to think about how does the measurement work for you. And I
Yeah.
think that's a trap that I've seen just being on LinkedIn and
Mm-hmm.
in communities and whatnot. People asking like, how should I measure this? Like, what should I do for this?
Yeah.
I think you use the word experimentation. Like, I love that word. What
Yeah.
does that imply? Let's go test something. If it
That's
doesn't
right.
work, let me write it down and let
That's
me
right.
improve upon it. So this relationship mindset, although I'm getting clients and myself to do different activities, I know
Mm-hmm.
it's going to grow over time. If we
That's
had this
right.
conversation in 9 months, I'm probably going to say we're doing different things. But
Yeah.
again, that mindset shift is what's getting me there, and not just again hyper focusing on revenue as a marketing department.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. And I'd say, just as an aside, something that popped in my mind about this idea of experimenting. I think marketers who are listening, in order to get the ear of leadership team to pour more money on something kind of maybe in your gut works, but you haven't been able to really articulate it fully. You have to try things, and you have to show leadership, even in a reporting cadence. You have to show them what you're doing and what you're trying to measure for what outcome, even if it doesn't win, even if it doesn't work, because they can at least see your thinking on paper. By doing that practical measure, you're gonna get more of their attention, as long as things are not going down consistently. Obviously, they're not going to support that. But just as an aside, I thought that would be good to mention. But kind of getting back to the main topic, I think one major roadblock to relationship type of marketing is ROI, right? Mm-hmm. Because in a business, you're investing money to make more money. That's when it gets down to it. That's why we're in business. We want to sell a product, sell a service. We want to delight our customers. We want to get more customers. We want more, with good cash flow. We want the money to come back in so we can reinvest it in our people, in our business. So ROI. It's really difficult, I think, for senior leadership to, let me start here. Because I'm totally tracking what you're saying, mm-hmm. right? And I guess I'm just saying it in my own way. I think that when you say, I have $10 and I want to make $100 out of it, you look for tactics. You look for things that other people have done. You try to deploy mm-hmm. your money in those places, like playing the stock market. It's not really different, that behavior, right? But it can't always play out that way, because the things that we know work, we may just not know how to articulate how they work. I think that's really kind of getting to what you're talking about. And I think it's always funny, because if I go into pretty much any company, if I were to say, hey, it's about relationships, we need to, ask for referrals, we need to create content that supports relationships, we need to do these type of things, you're going to get a lot of pushback, because they are in their mind thinking ROI. How do I get a return on my investment? But if I ask them, tell me where you got your last 10 clients, 8 of them are going to come from relationships. Right. And they won't know how they got to the point of getting the referral or whatever. Maybe they can't track that kind of quote unquote darker funnel, but that's just because they don't have that mechanism in place, or more of that mechanism in place. You may not have the whole thing ever, but I think it's funny because business people, business leaders won't invest in something that is already working, but you have to expose that truth mm-hmm. for them.
Yeah. I think where I want to take this is, that's a common refrain. We're going to hear, what's the ROI on your activity? And I think there's different answers for that. I would steal man the case, but what I'm kind of saying is, you don't need to worry about that. Actually, what you need to worry about is maybe getting that leadership alignment and buy-in into those relationship mm-hmm. activities. Mm-hmm. So the number one thing we're going to do for our clients is make sure leadership is involved in the relationship spaces. So mm-hmm. what do we run? We run podcasts for our clients, right? The founders on that, the CEOs on that, sales leaders on these podcasts, mm-hmm. they're going to participate in the relationship building.
It is.
And then once they do that, and we start to do these activities, like you and I are building a relationship right now as we're talking to each other.
That's right.
They're there. I don't even have to pull the qualitative data. I don't have to make all these slide shows and whatnot to show it. It's just they get to experience it. And that's what we already know is, again, professional services. This is a great niche for changing this mindset mm-hmm. to building relationships at scale, because your whole business is built on relationships, right? There's no out on the out of the box, out of the shelf product that you can sell someone, right? You have to build a relationship, build a customized quote. Mm-hmm. You have to figure out what value you can provide them now. Mm-hmm. There's not an easy, straightforward way to track that, right? Each relationship is going to be different. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm, again, just stressing, change the mindset. You'll do different things. You'll measure different things. You'll get different kind of buy-in and alignment, make it different questions, right? Mm-hmm. So I'll kind of pause there and see where we want to take that.
Yeah, no, it's great. I love how you very pointedly said, okay, we're here on this podcast right now, kind of forming a relationship as we talk. It's right there. And I would say the aftermath of this is, and this applies to anyone that I have on my podcast, or you have on yours, or maybe you had coffee with, or it doesn't have to be a podcast. I don't want to make this like some kind of multi-level mm-hmm. marketing thing where we're trying to sell podcasts, right? But mm-hmm. it's the whole point is, where are you converging one-to-one or even one-to-few? and what are you doing afterwards? So after this, if the relationship is good, if the rapport is good, if the credibility is good, I could literally pick up the phone or email at any point and reconnect with you, as long as I'm not trying to hard sell you on something and ruin it, and get a temperature for where you stand on whatever positive motivating thing there could be, right? So maybe there's a connection between our agencies, maybe there's a connection in our network, maybe there's something to leverage, but maybe not. Maybe there's time that has to pass too, which is typically the case. But I like that because it's one-to-one, and you can do that over coffee. You can do that on a podcast. I think when we get to this idea of scaling relationships, I see current day the podcast being one of the major levers of doing that, because you can interview people and accomplish all these goals. Because not only do you get the one-to-one. I mean, I can tell you my own personal experience. I started the podcast about a little over a year ago. I started inviting people on that I know in my close network. And then I asked them, who else do you know that's like you that would be a good person to interview? And then I get 2 or 3 per person. So it starts to splinter out. Now I have, 10 episodes of 10 close people and 30 people to call to interview, and, or not even to call if they're invited on by my past interviewee, and so on and so forth. As long as I'm there kind of priming the pump, I have plenty of people that are good quality. Next is a good sustainable pipeline, and it becomes exponential. It becomes scale. But then on the other side, you have distribution. So if I take all of this content and I say, okay, Aaron, I think is doing great things. I want to collab with him on something that we're both going to be at the HubSpot convention or whatever. I don't know if we'd ever end up there together, but we're going to be at some convention. Well, I mean, you can now leverage the relationship, the network, the content, and all the distribution of that on the back end, because you had this one instance. So I think it's very powerful personally, and I've actually seen it work for myself, and I've seen it work in my clients' businesses. So I'm a big proponent of this idea of building relationships to scale that, or relationships that can scale.
Definitely. I want to give a more concrete example of how this all plays out, and maybe from a strategic standpoint of why you'd want to make this decision. So some of the clients we work with, they're in biotech.
Yeah.
They are a professional service, and they want to build relationships with clients. The clients that they want to build relationships with are in stealth mode. They already work at other biotechs. There's no company targeting. There's no of the traditional distribution digital methods we can to reach them. But that doesn't mean we can't serve them as relationships. Right. So that's why we start to, again, change the mindset, do different activities. Another general one we do is, just starting a live event. Again, similar podcast format, but giving that relationship touch point that people can come back to. And then over time, with the distribution component, just as you said, it's I had this live event, I had this podcast, maybe I'm at this trade show. I already have a relationship with this individual because I'm doing a relationship activity. Those conversations are much easier. How about you come on the podcast? Now I'm building that rapport. I'm cultivating that. I'm growing that. Yeah. Okay. We know with professional services too, that I built this relationship now. They may be locked in a contract for 9, 12, 18 months. Yeah. They can't even buy now if they wanted to.
Right.
So I'm going to build this relationship now. In 18 months, when they're ready to buy, they know me. We've had a good time. They're ready to talk to someone that's helped solve their pain. I'm that person. Right. So that's what we're trying to get our clients to do. And in certain business cases, especially if you're in the professional services niche, like I think this is the way to go. Like you need to build relationships at scale, then you build revenue.
I agree 100%. 100%. Another practical example, working with a client and that B2B professional services, and they were considering starting a podcast. Again, this doesn't necessarily have to be a podcast, but the podcast is what was in the conversation. And, they had some conferences coming up that we had months to prepare for, to launch the podcast, kind of get a few guests under our belt, get everything smoothly. And I said, what we should do is just reach out to the executive director of the conference, who's well-known, has a big network, has been in the game for a long time, have that person on. And then let's start going through the guest speaker list. So we kind of host like the pre-game show, for Monday Night Football, like the pre-game show for the concert or for the conference. And we can also have a post-game show. So after the conference is done, we can interview all the people and say, what you said on the main stage was amazing, and here's why. But tell us more. Like there's so much more that you had to share. So let's hear it. I mean, that costs pretty much zero dollars in advertising, and it's all relationships. So let's say you did that for this year. What's going to happen next year? Everybody's going to be listening to that. It's all about distribution. Of course, you have to get that right, but everybody's going to be listening to the pregame, and they're going to be there for you when you're recording live at the conference, and they're going to be listening to the postgame if you make it interesting. So, you can own the attention of your audience, of your more widely addressable market, pretty easily. It really can happen with not a lot of money. So I'm a big fan of this idea of like building relationships. What's cool about it too is that it takes a lot of it. Like once you understand it, it goes back to mindset, right? Once you understand how this can work and how it can completely change your organization and growth, the trajectory, it really takes the pressure off of that lead gen model. It takes the pressure off of other, performance type marketing you might be doing. And it makes it fun, which usually equals people wanting to buy from you more because they want to, they want someone that's like not as stressed and tight about the whole thing. They want someone that just feels like this is their domain and, you're going to buy from us or you're not, but we're going to have fun.
Definitely. Something I'm going to linger on because we did talk about it is that lead gen model. And I want to explain it as a performance marketer and then go a little high level again of maybe why you want to think about something different. So I do have SaaS clients. I have e-commerce clients. I have professional service clients. Lead gen can work for SaaS clients. That growth model is a lot different than professional services.
That's
Again,
right.
lead gen, I can lower cost per lead. I can get them to demo. I can track and attribute if they close one as marketing source. Very straightforward. Even as I talk about that, if you don't know what that jargon is, that was 4 bullet points. You can figure it out. Professional services, way more complicated to even observe that journey and me talk through it. So on the flip side, besides lead gen, there's demand gen. This is another very popular topic on LinkedIn and again in our marketing spaces. If you listen to this podcast,
that's right.
There's nothing wrong with demand gen. I love demand gen. It's let's create education and value, distribute it in the feed. Just let people know how we can help them. There's like something very beautiful in that, right? But essentially, that works for SaaS quite well because you got to differentiate your product. It's a very competitive field. You have to really show why you have product market fit. You have to get people to demo your product, and that's why you're doing demand gen. Again, professional services, I have no product to demo. Like I cannot even run that same playbook. And that's why we're really trying to think about something different. Again, I'm floating these ideas, talking on podcasts until I flesh it out, but conversation generation.
You're on the right track.
Right.
You're definitely on the right track.
That's what we're going to call it. Conversation generation is, again, if I'm in professional services, I'll give you another example. Engineering firm, they medical devices. They help design the data that's needed to get it approved by the FDA. They need to have that conversation now with clients, even before they hire them. Right? Because if they get the data right now, there's a better case of them wanting to hire that professional service. So they need to have a conversation now. They need to build a relationship now. So we can use tactics like lead gen. We can use tactics like getting people on the podcast, on the live event. But really, again, the mindset is I just want to have a conversation with someone right now so I can build that relationship. Maybe later on I send them content. Hey, great, we already talked. I did this other podcast with Lee. I'm just going to send on you LinkedIn. I think you're interested.
Yeah.
Those are the activities that matter, right? We're people buying from people. If we can continue to do the activities that put people first, man, that's the marketing world I want to live in.
Yes. And I think to underscore that, I would say it's not one or the other. It can, in a lot of times it can be a mix of all three or a mix of two. I think that if someone's listening to this and like, well, where does this fit into my company? I think you have to look at your audience, right? Look at how are they buying? What's interesting to them? What are other competitors doing in your space? I think there's a there's some people who like to look at competition, some people don't. But I think what are other competitors doing from a marketing standpoint as far as how they're reaching out to prospective buyers, like their strategy, right? Not necessarily how are they doing, are they growing, but I think thinking about that is helpful because it will give you a bead on how to approach the market, how to approach your buyer, and give them actually add value to what it is that they're wanting you to do. And you might end up with a mix of educational content that you put together, and then maybe separate content or the same content that you use and distribute in a way that can be for ads and it can be for relationship building. A lot of the relationships that happen in mid-market B2B are business development focused. It's going to be salespeople. And, like you said, there's long sales cycles. So maybe it's 6 to 18 months. So they're building relationships in order to get that contract in 12 months. But I think tapping into the marketing team and the marketing mechanisms to help support that, what you end up doing is you end up building brand, you end up building relationships, you end up, driving more leads that tell you more things about what they need, influences messaging. There's so many things. So, I think it depends on the size of their team, the savviness of their lead marketer. It depends on a lot of factors. So it's not something that you really can just say, let's throw it all to the wind and start over. But I think going back to experimenting, looking at, what are some of the things that we can do at the same time and see what's working, what's not working. It's definitely worth pursuing when it comes to, we all know this is how life gets done, is through relationships, and that's where most impact can happen. I'll give one more sort of example or anecdote to this idea of conversations. It's funny, this is really the first time that you and I are getting together and talking, but we're very aligned, and it's obvious, like it's very fluid, very aligned in how we think. I think we're both wired as the why guys that we're looking at it philosophically first, which I think more organizations need. If I were, don't want to be partial, but I just think that, the bigger picture helps sometimes. I think that looking at the marketing funnel, like the traditional way of looking at awareness, engagement, conversion, I've started working with marketing teams. I've started to help to change their mindset to, okay, there are awareness activities that we can do. There are engagement, like nurturing on email and nurturing on LinkedIn, and where they can be relationship oriented. And again, back to the we always give credit to Danchez about like the Loom videos is very hyper personalized. There's ways to dial that up, but when you get to the conversion part, what I've started kind of advising is not think about it as conversions, but think about that tranche of buyers, prospective buyers, as meaningful conversations, right? This is how I've been thinking about it. So you go from awareness, this is ideally what we want to do. Go from awareness to engagement to a meaningful conversation as quickly as possible and as many people as possible. And in those meaningful conversations is where we bring in our BDR, business development rep, whatever their title is, and introduce. And that can be done seamlessly on a podcast with 3, 4, 5 people, or depending on the personality or character of the people that are on your marketing and sales team, it could be a salesperson. I had Laura from Dream Data on not too long ago. She's a good example of that. She's on a sales team. She's business development, but you would never know. You would think that she's leading their marketing, right? Because she totally gets it, and she's out there doing this. She's doing LinkedIn Lives like twice a week or something, and doing a podcast and all. So that's the kind of person you want to step over into marketing and take those meaningful conversations genuinely and pull them into the sales process.
Love it. I think one activity that we haven't talked about specifically, but we believe it at Proofpoint, I'll shout out Gorilla 76 because I work there too, is customer interviews and stakeholder interviews. Is we should be talking to people about how they sell to people, about how they build content and products for people. And then through that activity, we're going to get so much insights to have those meaningful conversations. And I think, again, I've worked with SaaS too. that mindset was a little different. It's just a little hard to get in front of customers.
Mhm.
I think if you're in professional services, like this should be your bread and butter. Like we should have customer interviews set up all the time. We have that
Yes.
feedback loop, that relationship feedback loop created. I can understand just some other things besides awareness engagement. It's what excites them.
Mhm.
What are they skeptical about? What are the things that actually make them feel loyal?
Mhm.
We can start to pull some of these other things out, and like that's actually going to help our funnel, right? If we're going to make content for our funnel, we really want to know the nitty gritty of like how they feel. Again, we're people,
Yes.
so a lot of the time when I'm leading a client call, I think people are like, "Why do you do this?" I'm like, I just stop and say, "Hey, how are you feeling? Let me know.
Mhm.
Do you like this? Do you not like this?"
Yep.
I think again, change that mindset, asking different questions.
Mhm.
That's going to give you different inputs, so you can do different kind of relationship marketing.
Yeah, it's almost like a counseling like hat that you put on for whenever it's appropriate, and again, I think about this too. Like it doesn't have to be a podcast. It can be on the phone. It can be by email ish, and it could be having coffee with someone, like meeting somebody for breakfast, coffee, events. Getting people in a one-on-one or one-to-few environment is super beneficial. I mean, I don't want to go on and on about all my stories, but I had like lots of experiences of being in those one to few settings, and the richness of the feedback is like yours to lose, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like they tell you everything and more stuff that you don't want them to tell you. Like goes against NDAs, and it goes against like relationships that you both mutually know, and like it's people are people. But if you can take that rich feedback and turn it into something that hits that hot point for, but there's 10 or 20 other people that think just like that or feel just like that. That's where the magic is.
Definitely. And there's so much magic in what I'm saying. And I'll kind of probably may end on the why, and shameless plug for the Purposeful Marketing Podcast. I think as marketers, we can ask bigger questions.
Mm-hmm.
I know in my career, as I came up, it was you ran lead gen campaigns. There was no questions about it. But I started to feel the customer friction and also understand the friction within myself of like, this doesn't feel like good marketing.
Yeah.
So when we take a step back and we ask why, like, why are we doing this? I think that's just going to make us all better. I think we're going to do different things. And I think that's a theme that I talk on my show with, and it's important. I think jumping on here with you, Lee, like I'm energized. I'm excited, right, to ask more why and have more conversations with people to build those relationships.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it's been awesome having you on, and I think what we touched on is sort of like maybe a little bit more than the tip of the iceberg. We're kind of right below the surface of the water, but I struggle with that too. I mean, as a side note, I struggle with like how deep can I take someone that's just coming into this idea of getting back to relationships or getting back to, one-to-one scaling, people. But I don't know. I think it'd be cool to have you back on and let's see how we can go deeper. How can we take what we've put out there as sort of the first pass and dive deeper for companies, lead marketers, CEOs, people that want growth, but they want to do it in a way that doesn't turn their culture into something that they don't want it to be. It doesn't break their culture, because a lot of what we do in marketing, it either amplifies culture, in one way or another. So I don't know. There's a lot more below the surface. So we should get back together and go for it.
Definitely. I'm down to chat anytime. The way I would say is we tackle the mindset. Maybe we do skill set next, and we end with tool set. I want to give you all, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, you already got the roadmap, man. Okay, so we got 2 more to go.
That's right.
Mindset, check.
The trilogy.
Skill sets next. I like it. Cool. All right. So I'm going to send people your way once we put this out there. Where should we send them, and what should they know about you?
Definitely. So I would definitely follow the Purposeful Marketing Podcast. My co-host, Mary Keogh, is the relationship that got me here on this podcast. So give us both a follow on LinkedIn. I'm more video content. She does a lot of written content, and she's fantastic. Follow Proofpoint Marketing for more if you want this relationship mindset, POV, and playbooks and all that. That's the stuff we're trying to build this year. And we'd be happy to kind of have those conversations with you too. If you want to DM us and just ask us, how can I implement this in my marketing strategy? Even if you can't hire us, we want to have that conversation because those are relationships we want to build. those would be my plugs there. But thanks for having me, Lee. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. All right. We'll do it again next time. Skill set.
Skill set. That's right.
Thanks for listening to this week's podcast episode. I'm so glad you're hopefully getting some value from this. And a lot of other people are too, apparently, because it's starting to grow. I'm starting to get lots of feedback from all the listeners on LinkedIn and various different platforms. One of the ways that you can engage further with this podcast and with the ideas that are shared here is through our email newsletter, which we've just pretty recently launched and getting some really good traction on. And if you go to harvardmurray.com and click on Exploring Growth at the top, you'll see a little spot right there. You can enter your email to sign up for it. So if that's something you want to do, please do that. Also, if you are getting value from this, please go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave a review, hopefully 5 stars. We've had some spam lately, so that wasn't fun, but hey, it'd be awesome if you guys went and left your thoughts on, what kind of value you're getting from this. But hope you're enjoying. We'll see you on the next one.